Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to let you know that if you're here for the Federal Home Loan Bank and Darling Consulting Group webinar, you're in the right place. We're going to give other participants some time to get on, and we'll get started here in just 5 minutes or so. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Seville. I'm the Director of Sales for FHL Bank Topeka. We appreciate you joining us for this webinar, Credit Stress During a Pandemic. We're proud to partner with Darling Consulting Group to bring this timely subject to you. And our speaker today is Justin Baxt. As a managing director with Darling Consulting Group, Justin brings nearly 2 decades of experience evaluating asset liability management and assessing bank credit risk. Justin has provided credit stress testing guidance and analysis to top 10 banks as well as community banks and credit unions. He provides risk management education and strategic consultation to financial institutions, leveraging Darling's analytical solutions. Justin has been a thought leader in risk management, including interest rate risk, credit risk, and liquidity risk, as well as emerging risks, including artificial intelligence and machine learning. His focus is developing and implementing solutions that analyze customer behavior patterns to proactively manage embedded risks and drive higher levels of earnings. Justin is a frequent speaker and author with the RMA, American Banker, New York Times, and CIO magazine. I'll turn it over to Justin to go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome today. And I want to first thank the folks at FHLB Topeka. They've been a partner of ours for quite a long time, and they put together first-class content for their members, and hopefully today's presentation will live up to that first-class reputation. So when we think about today's environment, we hope you're all weathering the storm, but really make no mistake about this crisis. This is not a banking crisis. This is a healthcare crisis. And we strongly believe that proper planning and strategy discussion today will prevent this health crisis from transforming into a banking crisis. Almost every bank we speak with has the same questions. How bad could credit-related losses become in this crisis? What are the shorter and longer-term impacts of forbearance and restructuring, reserve losses and charge-offs? And how, in turn, will loan cash flow, liquidity, and earnings and capital adequacy be impacted? There really are no definitive answers, but we as an industry, we're in this together. And we're going to talk about today how credit stress testing can help answer some of these questions and really be utilized as a valuable tool in your toolkit at the institution. And when we talk about and think about credit stress testing and contingency planning, this cartoon rings more true today than ever before. Most are familiar with Murphy's Law. I'm from Boston. We call him Murph. And he said that everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And as we build out our strategic plan and our contingency plan, we believe now is the right time more than ever to kind of look at your credit exposure and your overall strategic plan through this lens. The question is, why stress test? Why stress test? And today we're going to boil this down so it's simple, easy, and digestible. But let's just take a step back and think about what managing through a crisis best practices look like, okay? And so what we first want to understand is, all right, during a shocked economic environment, what will be the impact to our loans, to our losses, and in turn, our capital adequacy position? And in that environment, what we recommend is to look at 3 different things or 3 different areas when we think about our national employment picture, our local employment picture, and the impact in our institution and the eventual recovery. It's the probability, number 1, the severity, and the duration. And that's how we want to think through scenario analysis. We're going to talk about scenario analysis today. And so when we talk about scenario analysis, we talk about forecasting, and forecasting can be wrong, right? We don't have a crystal ball, and in risk management, that is not the point. The point isn't to have a crystal ball, but I thought, given the circumstances, let's try to keep this light. And I found a funny prediction for 2020. And in 1900, John Watkins Jr., head of mechanical technology at the Smithsonian, predicted by 2020 the letters C, X, and Q will no longer be in the alphabet, right? But why do this, right? We want to do this because, again, there's no crystal ball, but as risk managers, we have a responsibility to triangulate risk and manage accordingly, and that's what we're going to discuss today. And if we think about delinquency rates and credit conditions, delinquency rates are an interesting subject today. One banker, I'm going to quote, said to me this week, with all of these forbearance requests that we have, it's almost like it's pretend and extend, or extend and pretend. There's so many unanswered questions today on delinquency and loan losses in our overall credit position. But what I can tell you is that we were at 30-year lows for delinquency rates. And I think everyone on the phone today believes that this number is going to move higher. We can see the last two recessions where we ended up. Actually, the last three recessions back to 1990. Today we're at all-time lows. And thinking about where we're going to end up with delinquencies and overall loan losses, clearly part of the planning and why we have so many people on the phone today. And so with that is our first polling question today. And the question is, and we're going to put it out there for you, is how bad do you expect credit losses to be as we come out of the Great Lockdown? Is it A, similar to experiences during other recessions? Is it B, the worst losses in our history? Is it C, very little losses? D, too early to tell? Or E, other? And Jesse, have you put up the poll? So I'm not currently having access to the poll, Jesse. Just, you might have to share it on your screen. As we wait for the poll figures to come in, what I'll say from talking to bankers and sharing stories from the field is, I think a lot of folks believe it's too early to tell, but there's caution. There's caution, and we'll talk about that caution. But I would say most folks we talk to are prepared for the worst. They're cautiously optimistic, and at the same time believe it's too early to tell. So Jesse, I'm still unable to see the poll results. I know the polling has ended. I don't know if you're able to share with the group. Yeah, I'm not, okay, here we go, perfect. All right, so how bad do you expect credit losses to be? So it looks like the majority agrees with what I'm hearing, too early to tell. Quite a few of you had no answer, and then worst losses in our history. And so, and a few similar to experience to the other recessions. So I think we have a little bit of everyone here today, and we'll be able to hit on all those different perspectives. And I think that's how we can really utilize credit stress testing to understand and triangulate risks. So with that, our agenda for today, we're going to talk through economic developments impacting the financial industry, and specifically credit-related conditions. I'm sure you're getting this information from all different sources today. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I do think it's important to set the stage. Then we're going to talk about best practices for credit stress analysis. really boiling this down, utilizing some of our lessons from the largest institutions in the country and how we really believe it can be applied to community banks and credit unions in this environment. And then we'll talk about some thought leadership and some R&D we've done on credit stress testing impacting capital in the industry. So first, let's talk a little bit about employment levels. This graph does not include today's numbers. Today's numbers was an additional 3 million jobless claims. You know, these are unprecedented. The type of shock we've seen over such a short period of time. The St. Louis Fed, as this crisis first emerged, estimated upwards of 47 million job losses. What we're seeing is sectors such as restaurants, hospitality, and tourism are, of course, getting hit the hardest, but other sectors as well, including healthcare. I think there's some echoing happening. Assuming healthcare, and also, of course, we have some agricultural lenders on the phone today, and we've seen some impact in that sector as well. So when we talk about credit stress testing and we talk about credit losses historically, our quantitative team built this pretty interesting graph. So this graph is looking at national loss rates in the community banking space, the 10 billion and under. And the gray is those national loss rates. And what you'll notice is we put unemployment rate against these losses to show the correlation. And of course, I don't think it surprises anyone on the call today that we have high correlations between unemployment rates and credit losses. And we're gonna talk about that in individual sectors as well, but this is going to be the backdrop of some discussions. And so when we look at the commercial real estate portfolios in the industry, really since 2002, what we see is a similar trend. During the financial crisis, the graph on the left, the blue, we can see much higher losses. And in residential portfolio on the right, the same is true. And you can see those losses move down as the unemployment rate has moved down. What might be surprising to some on the phone, you know, we know the ag portfolios are idiosyncratic. They're unique, right? And there's other elements besides employment levels that impact credit losses, and you can see that over the last few years with tariffs and exports, commodity prices, etc. But I think when you look at this at a high level credit management, and you think through not only the idiosyncratic risks, but general trends, we did see a spike during the Great Recession in loss rates in agricultural loans, and a pretty close correlation to unemployment levels as well. So that will be a discussion. So let's dive a little bit into the details. Let's look at the commercial real estate markets and the uncertainty. I thought this was a great chart that the Mortgage Bankers Association put together. And it's a little stale. It's from April 3rd, but I still think it rings true today. And so what are we looking at? The blue here, this is the change in unemployment. And then we have different lines here. And what those different lines are is those are risk-free, these are cap rate spreads. So these are the risk-free returns for commercial real estate. And what you'll notice on this graph on the far left is in 1999, there was really this general bullishness with really low unemployment, which pushed cap rates lower. All right, and these spreads, they started to rise in 2000. And what you noticed is as unemployment started to rise, spreads were already 300 to 400 basis points higher. In the middle graph in 2007, really prior to the financial crisis, there was this thirst for yield and heavy competition among real estate investors. and that pushed spreads to 1995 lows. At the same time, what you'll notice is unemployment levels, they started to rise, and so did spreads, and they remained elevated. Then you look to the right, and you fast forward to today. Cap rate spreads are entering this current downturn close to levels previously seen in the last two downturns. And what is interesting about this chart is this only goes to the end of last year, and Treasury yields have since moved down roughly 100 basis points, putting cap rate spreads roughly at the same place we were the last two recessions. Now, many believe and hope that this current downturn is going to be sharp and short, and it's possible that cap rates are unaffected, at least spreads are unaffected by this crisis, but I believe that's a big, big but. Commercial real estate property dynamics are changing. As we all know, most office property tenants now have capabilities to work remotely. How's this going to impact vacancy and rent levels in the coming years? In addition, we really haven't fully realized the impact or longer-term impact to the retail and the hotel industry. And so it's clearly an uncertain commercial real estate environment. And when we think about this from a valuation standpoint, as you can see from this chart, commercial real estate prices have really moved higher the last 11 years. And I believe this dynamic is going to change. After the financial crisis, we saw a 30% dip before the eventual rebound. And today, what I'll say is valuations have doubled since 2009. Of course, some property types are going to get hit harder than others, but this is going to have an impact on projected loan to value on each and every one of your balance sheets to the extent you're a commercial real estate. Forbearance. So forbearance, this is the extend and pretend that we discussed earlier on. And according to MBA's forbearance and call volume survey, this is 45% or 22 million loans. You can see some surprising trends, and this is just in the last week of March. So, what you see is Ginnie Mae forbearance requests went from around 25 basis points to 425 basis points, or 4.25%. That's over a 2,000% increase in just a few weeks. If you look at these numbers today, what you'll see is close to double. Anecdotally, what we see on the front lines is anywhere between a 5 to even a 40% forbearance, depending on the type of portfolio and the type of institution we look at. So these forbearance requests are impacting banks' balance sheets. What's also interesting on the residential credit markets is we have fluidity, and you're seeing this in the largest banks from both Chase and Bank of America. Both have announced that those looking to refinance 700 plus FICO score, 20% down payment. We've seen cracks in the jumbo market. We're also seeing nervous home owners trying to tap into home equity loans. And large banks just haven't been as responsible. And although there are some credit concerns out there, I firmly believe it puts community banks and credit unions in the driver's seats to continue to help this country weather the storm. So an opportunity for those folks on the phone today. What I'll also say just generally about the real estate property dynamics is we still have a real estate supply issue in this country. And like anything else, residential real estate is supply and demand, and that bodes well for some of the long-term dynamics. This isn't 2008 all over again. And then on the ag slide, and so I'm sure most have seen the article that was in the Journal this week. If not, I encourage you to check this out. We've seen falling commodity prices, of course, and that continues. We're already dealing with challenges we've experienced as far as tariffs, and really the layoffs have wreaked havoc in the industry. I spoke with an ag lender who deals with live cattle yesterday, and he shared some pretty interesting stats with me. He said in normal times, Americans eat out 54% of the time. And when they eat out, they tend to, they tend to eat steak and some of these middle meats. And he's seen slaughter down 32% and really impacting this overall sector. And as we think about our ag portfolio and how forbearance may be impacted, I know many are dealing with annual payments of loans and will experience what forbearance and credit concerns might look like come the fall. So I would say this slide is the most important slide. If you only have one takeaway from today, it would be this slide. And what I will say is, regardless of your asset size or your strength of capital, we firmly believe that this current crisis creates this heightened need for contingency planning and credit stress testing. And what do we want to do? We want to quantify your ability to absorb loss and grow in different economic scenarios. We want to develop pro forma capital projections to guide strategy. We want to understand the impact of stressful circumstances on the capital position, inform early warning monitoring systems, and develop contingency plans. And I'd say one of those early warning monitoring systems that you want to utilize for a credit analysis would be your liquidity contingency plan. And your contingency liquidity needs, and this is a FHLB webinar, and I think your use of wholesale funds can be somewhat dictated by that liquidity position and assumptions you utilize given your outlook for your credit and capital position moving forward. So with that, we're going to go to another poll, and we'll see if we have any additional technical issues. But the question is going to be does your institution perform a credit stress test analysis with a forward-looking view of macroeconomic factors? Is it A, yes, B, no, C, I don't know? I'll give you a few seconds to answer this. And we'll kind of share the results. What I'll say is that what a definition of forward-looking view of macroeconomic factors probably varies between institutions. What I'm really saying is an outlook on unemployment, an outlook on maybe interest rates and other local dynamics that could impact your credit position. And I'll wait for Jesse to share, and we can put up the results. So the poll has ended. The last time I did this poll, it was about 50-50. I was surprised, but I think sometimes it's driven by the size of institution attending this webinar. So this is pretty close. So A, yes, so that's 43%. B, no, is 25%. C, I don't know, about 4%, and about 28% didn't answer. So more said yes than anything else. That's great. I think we'll have some robust discussions today. So with that, Jesse, if you can send me that. Great. So let's talk about some best practices for credit stress test analysis and leverage some of our experiences with the largest banks. What's interesting is we've done DFAST model validations for over 35% of the banks in that area. And what we found is that this stress testing started in 2011 as purely a regulatory issue to understand what sort of capital exists in the industry. What has happened, though, is this has become a risk management best practice for institutions of all sizes. And you see that because some of these, many of these DFAST institutions continue to perform these stress tests even when the requirements are no longer there. And what's happened is the Federal Reserve, they've provided a safe harbor for us. And so they publish macroeconomic scenarios every year. And that's what you're looking at here. They publish 16 macroeconomic factors and really to test capital and loan loss levels back to 2008. And so what you're looking at in the top right-hand side is unemployment rate, historical unemployment rate nationally back to 1993. And then we can see a projection for both a baseline, so a base case economic forecast, and a severely adverse forecast. What's interesting is in the current environment, the severely adverse that the Fed had put out there in December, we've already surpassed it. We've already surpassed those unemployment levels. But again, this is a safe harbor. Regulators understand these scenarios. Auditors understand these scenarios, and we can learn something from these scenarios. So that's where we're going to start with today's discussion. And so if we look at historical credit losses, what we've done at DCG is we've taken historical credit losses, specifically charge-off balances, recovery balances, total loans and leases, quarterly from the FDIC. We've done this for all loan categories, for all community institutions. We've done it with the NCUA data, and we've looked back to 1995, which allows us to look at several different economic cycles. So you can see we have the early 2000s recession, dot-com bubble. We have the Great Recession as well, and we can see how net charge-offs have moved over time. And that's really step one, is the data input. And by the way, there's a level of quality control that goes into this level of understanding this data input. That's an important part of this process. Step two. Step two is to look at historical charge-offs. And so what we did here is we created a pretty simple regression model. And so all we did was we modeled unemployment rates against net charge-off rates to understand this dynamic and how this changes over time. And then we're able to leverage this information and project out how loss rates will behave industry-wide. This is what industry-wide is, looking at just unemployment rates and looking at different scenarios, including a baseline, an adverse scenario, and a severely adverse scenario. This is just a footnote, but more of an FYI. The Fed didn't publish an adverse scenario this year, but we've databased all the adverse scenarios, and we decided to look at a rising rate scenario that I think they utilized in 2015 because we just thought that's a really important scenario in today's environment. And so this model and most forward-looking models typically look at unemployment. But it's probably not enough, right? We know that our credit losses are driven by more than just unemployment. Looking at economic activity, GDP, inflation, real income, nominal income. Looking at asset prices, including the stock market, commercial real estate prices. Looking at interest rates. These really need to be a part of any forward-looking analysis. And when we look at this analysis and we model credit stress test losses, we look at individual portfolios, and it's more of a multi-factor regression model where we'll take multiple macroeconomic factors or trends, unemployment rate, GDP, CPI, VIX, and BBB corporate spreads or yields in this scenario, and we take the best fit for each portfolio and project out credit loss. And what you'll notice is a much better fit in these loss lines versus loss lines you've seen in other slides. And so how do we do that? The way we do this, if you look at the top left, is we first create a list of combination of different variables. We test the correlations between those variables, and then we run linear regression for each model. We export that analysis, and then what our quant team does is it applies model selection, right? Are the predictions sensible? Do they make sense? Are the weights acceptable? Are there specific variables we want to think through? Are projected loss rates directionally consistent? And then we'll utilize expert judgment, right? It's mixing the quantitative with the qualitative. And that's not just from the quantitative perspective, it's also from the business perspective. And then we create a final model. And so what we know, though, is this isn't the whole story. So the federal stress test and their scenarios are a nice regulatory safe harbor, but best practices, specifically in this environment, is to look at other scenarios. Because what you'll notice, and you see this with my red arrow that I pointed to, is if we look at current unemployment rates, they've just shot up to close to 15% in this environment. And so we need to create other tests and other paths to look at our portfolio and see how this might play out longer term. And so, look, I get it. Economic forecasts are always wrong. There's no right answer. The right answer is looking at several different economic forecasts, understanding where that we fall, and building our strategic plan and our contingency plan accordingly. Love this cartoon, wanted to share it with the group today. And what it says is in a Washington Economic Summit, a panel of 3 economists offered 24 opinions about the direction of global economics. So I'm going to let you all play armchair economists today as part of today's discussion, as part of our polls. What we'll first talk about is the alphabet soup of recoveries. And there's all different recoveries that are now being discussed. So we're talking about A, a W-shaped recovery or a double dip recession, B, a V-shaped recovery, a sharp drop followed by a sharp rebound, a U-shaped recovery with a prolonged bottom, and an L-shaped recovery, no recovery at all for the foreseeable future. And so what I'll let you do is ask the question: what shape would you expect the economic recovery to take? And we'll let you answer this question. What's interesting is even over the last week, new letters and shapes have emerged. So now we have what I've heard called the swoosh, the Nike swoosh shape recovery. So this is a V shape, but it's a little bit longer than a V. But let's call a swoosh shape also a V, and we'll see what you folks say will be the recovery. I think all of us want this V. I think as this COVID crisis goes on, I think less of the V becomes likely, but still in many folks' vocabulary. So I think with that, we can maybe close out the poll and see where we came in. Give you a few more seconds to get your vote in. We'll play the alphabet soup. So the double dip recession. So this is the W shape. We have about 21%. So I think what folks are thinking here that might happen is we get back to work, and then come the fall, we see a reemergence of the virus. That could take on the shape of a double dip. A V-shaped 3%. Wow, that's really changed. I did a very similar webinar 2 weeks ago, and I'd say 50% of the respondents said V-shaped. U-shaped, 44%, the majority. L-shaped, no recovery. There was some pessimists in the group, and then no answer. Jesse, when you have a chance, you can send it back to me, because what I'm going to share with you is, as of I think it was the second week in April, so this is only a few weeks ago, but weeks or years now, this is what the top economists in the Wall Street Journal gave us, these similar answers. So 50-50 split. I think regardless, whether we're seeing a V-shaped, a swoosh-shaped, a U-shaped, an L-shaped, a W-shaped. I think the point here is there probably is no right answer. And in that vein, what we've decided to do as a company is partner with Oxford Economics. Oxford Economics, they're a macroeconomic forecasting shop. They're one of the best in the country. They have over 250 economists. And this is what they think about every day is different economic scenarios, what's going to happen into the future in not only a baseline environment, but also a pandemic type environment. And you can see some of their initial projections of unemployment rate. I think since then they've revised unemployment figures in the pandemic scenario closer to 18%. You can see some of their projections for GDP and the house price index, but using more realistic scenarios, I think takes this exercise of credit stress testing away from a theoretical exercise and more into a practical scenario planning exercise that you can do at your institution. And so what you'll notice is folks like Greg Dacko, who's the chief economist at Oxford, he was initially, this is really early on, calling for 30 million job losses, which is close to a 19% unemployment rate. Bernanke early on, he called for a V-shaped recovery. He really thought that this is more like a natural disaster because we have the emergency relief and the stimulus. There's really anti-recessionary responses. You know, to a certain extent, the stock market may be responding in this fashion, but I think we're yet to see that. What we've decided to do as kind of a thought exercise is look at the components of unemployment. And we did this looking at 2019, but I think it's a nice kind of thought leadership exercise to look at unemployment in this way. So in 2019, we had 3.7% unemployment. The figures to the left are where those unemployment, where the unemployment lays as far as sector. If leisure and hospitality was 100% unemployed, we'd have close to 13% unemployment. If the whole wholesale and retail sector was unemployed, we have 24.7%. If transportation and utilities, we'd have 30%. Of course, what we've seen is other sectors have been impacted: education, healthcare, professional services. I mean, everyone's been impacted by this crisis. Again, hopefully it's short and sharp, but an interesting exercise nonetheless. So as you can see, Oxford has this baseline and coronavirus pandemic scenario. What we believe is kind of an extreme scenario is acceptable and important as well. So you'll see this DCG pandemic. This is more of a sensitivity test as well. And you'll see that what we're talking about is unemployment rates significantly higher than what we're seeing in even the Oxford Outlook. It's probably for those folks that voted Team U in a recovery, or even Team L, it's probably more in line with those folks. So best practices, and we're going to talk through this, is really on the left, you have the Federal Reserve safe harbor scenarios. We have Oxford Economics, an outside third-party economic expert, looking at macroeconomic factors, and then sensitivity testing and using some of DCG's pandemic scenarios to look at what happens in extreme losses. So what we're going to do is we're going to transition this to credit stress testing and its impact on capital. And before I move forward and onto the next slide, the question we often get is, but Justin, we don't want to know. Things are going to look really, really bad. And we don't want to put ourselves in that position. And what I'll tell you is my experience in the field and my experience working with my colleague, Drew Bosher, who was really in charge of large bank supervision and deeply involved pre-recession with bank failure simulations. And what we've seen at both the big bank and the small bank is those institutions that have thought about what credit losses could look like are just in a much better position to prepare, right? This is a preparation exercise. This is like a fire drill or an insurance policy. You know, this is setting up discussions with management and showing that showing the regulators that you've thought through these issues and that you have a good defense against some questions you could get. It's not, hey, this is where our capital levels end up and there should be concerns, because almost every bank in the country, if you see 30, 40% unemployment, are going to have some capital constraints. So this is a strategic exercise that's really a best practice. But the good news, and the regulators know this, right? This actually came from the OCC, is the industry is very well capitalized. Again, this is not a banking crisis. This is a healthcare crisis. Whether we look at tier one leverage or capital ratio, whether we look at all banks or we look at small banks, capital levels close to 200 basis points, if not more, higher right now going into this crisis. And it's why I believe that specifically the community banks are going to come out of this crisis stronger than ever before. So when we think about credit losses, let's just walk through a case study. Because I think that's what everyone wants to think through is like, all right, what does a case study look like? And so this is expected dollar amounts for the baseline forecast in different portfolios to the left, and a severely adverse scenario to the right. So you can see total losses go from $2.2 million to $23 million for this bank. So what can we do with this information? Well, there's a few different ways we can utilize this information. As I mentioned, liquidity contingency plans, looking at the impact from a liquidity purpose is hugely valuable. Loss reserves, whether we're utilizing CECL or not, this can help justify or challenge what your current loss reserves are or could be during this environment. And of course, looking at capital ratios. So very valuable information for our clients. What I'll also mention on this slide, to the extent this is of interest to you folks, specifically how it relates to capital, I've shown you some capital slides, and this is going to be one of them. And we've done an analysis looking at the entire industry through our platform. And so I'm able to at least run the baseline forecast for your institution. If that's something you'd like me to walk through with you, I'm happy to do that. But this is an interesting analysis. So this is looking at tier one leverage ratios for all banks less than $1 billion. Okay? And it looks at ratio distribution on a histogram. I know there's a lot going on here, but you look at this histogram, the top, the blue is our base case forecast, the Fed's base case forecast. The orange is a Fed's adverse forecast, and the red is the Fed's severely adverse forecast. We have a regulatory minimum of 5% tier one leverage, and all these little light blue or light orange or light gray, red bars represent where the industry ends up. Really interesting. So you'll notice almost all institutions are above that 5% well capitalized. This institution shows up as a dark blue, dark orange, dark red. So this is the type of analysis we're able to do for you folks to put these losses in perspective. We're able to do this as well in risk-based capital. What's interesting with risk-based capital, you'll see most institutions stay at the regulatory minimum 10% until we get to the severely adverse scenario. And you can see there's a little bit of exposure there. Again, regulators are going to continue. This is my personal opinion. This isn't from any sort of regulatory feedback I've received, but my anticipation is that given how easily available this type of analysis is to the smaller institutions, this is going to be the type of analysis that they may want to see. because it really is streamlined and there's strategic value. So I believe that this is probably the most valuable. So what we've looked at so far is these Fed scenarios. These Fed scenarios can probably be a little bit more theoretical, and this is utilizing the full pandemic and the Oxford economic scenarios. I actually believe this specific scenario is the DCG pandemic, looking at risk-based capital. So of course there's pressure there as an industry, and I think important to note given where we are. But the majority of institutions still fall above that 10% well capitalized. So how do we think about this? Well, we need to think about this stress test as looking at the results and looking at how we fall into regulatory prompt corrective categories. So the first thing that you need to keep in mind when you look at these numbers is we're assuming that the institution takes 13 quarters of projected losses and we take it immediately, right? So that's the most important talking point as we think through these losses. We start with conservative, we move backwards. All right, we leverage this PCA framework. We look at well-capitalized, adequately capitalized, and undercapitalized, look at leverage, risk-based, and CET1, and understand where you end up. And what we'll notice consistently is most institutions end up at least adequately capitalized, if not well capitalized, which is, again, a testament to how much capital we have in the industry. And I think it's important for folks on the phone. So this kind of supplemental analysis that we believe is best practice is looking at two different analytics, right? It's the regulatory safe harbor, those scenarios provided by the Fed, the regulators understand them, the auditors understand them, they're widely published and very transparent. But then also taking into context the current economic environment and also understanding the fluidity of that economic environment. Because this isn't, in my opinion, a one and done type analysis. This is an ongoing monitoring system, looking at those, what I call KPIs or key performance indicators that might start noticing where there are some bubbles, where are there some cracks. And I think those are really best practices. So with that, I'll follow up with one of my favorite quotes from Alan Greenspan. It says, "Senator, if I seem unduly clear to you, you must have misunderstood what I've said." Again, there are no right answers when we're doing this analysis. There's a series of answers, and understanding how those answers play into your specific institution is a best practice and should help inform strategy. Really, at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is how does it help our institution come out of this COVID stronger than we are before. So with that, I'm going to open up to some Q&A. The way we'll do Q&A is in the chat section. So it's at the bottom of your screen. There's a little icon that's a bubble. And if you have any questions, you can put them in that chat feature. What I'll also do is I have my email address here. If you want to reach out, send me an email. Happy to walk through some of the information on these slides in a little bit more detail and answer any questions you folks might have as you kind of think about this challenging environment. I will just personally thank every institution on the phone today. I'm really proud to work in this industry, specifically the community banking credit union industry. You've been there for our communities and for your customers in this environment, and just a great time to be a part of this industry. Well, if there's no questions, I'll turn it back to Susan and the folks at the Federal Home Loan Bank. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Justin. I believe he's as he said, provided his contact information there. So if you have any questions you'd like to send his way, I'm sure he'd be happy to help you with those. And we'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We will be emailing you an article that Justin has very kindly provided us to share with you. And we'll also be sending you Justin's slides and the recording of the webinar. So you can look for that email coming your way here in the next day or two. So with that, thank you everyone, and we hope you got some useful information today. Appreciate it again, Justin. Thank you.